All right, so we're going to quickly go over Global Contemporary so that we are ready for that AP Art History test. Sorry for the weird layout here. I just wanted to go through my slides a lot faster. Ignore my too many tabs. Starting with some paintings, we have Horn Players by John Michael or Michel Basquiat, 1983 acrylic and oil paint stick on 3 canvas panels. Anytime we have panels, we are talking about triptychs. If there's 3 of them. So he's relating to art historical themes of religion and how they are portrayed in the past. But now we are highlighting something more contemporary. Black culture. Wow, crazy. So he is going back to Harlem Renaissance traditions as well as his own personal culture, life, understanding of the world. There he is, young, fresh artist. At this time, he is challenging the art world and challenging the place of black artists at the time. Hangs out with Andy Warhol and some other big names once he's out there in the world. He was actually known as Samo, him and a friend of his, as he did graffiti art, critiquing artists, corporations, talking about the things that no one wanted to talk about. So he had a sense of sarcasm. And in this piece, he's highlighting black culture. He likes to bring text from his Samo past into his work. He repeats words like dizzy and ornithology, pre-teeth, as it relates to our 2 major figures here, Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie. These are 2 major jazz musicians that help bring black culture to the spotlight. They are incredible artists. And his piece is about them, highlighting them in this triptych style. He is trying to stand out as his own artist. So when people refer to him as the Black Picasso, he's like, no, thank you. I am my own man. But he is trying to rewrite history, confronting race issues, and bringing a positive light to the black community, which even in the 80s still faced a lot of problems, even today. Yay! Next, we have Summer Trees by Song Soo Nam, 1983, ink on paper. And Song Soo Nam is going back to the traditions of Chinese ink painting, so like from the Song Dynasty with travelers among mountains and streams, for example. He is Korean, and he's trying to combine his intellectual and artistic pursuits in the tradition of a scholar artist. That scholar artist concept is very important for him, as, sorry for the pronunciation, he is the leader of the Sumukwa, or the Oriental ink movement. Oriental is a word that we do not use anymore, just heads up. The Sumukwa was the Korean pronunciation of ink wash painting, also called illiterati painting. This comes from Confucianism because Confucianism was really about scholarships and literature and painting and combining all of the proper ways of showing respect. Chinese is an incredibly hard language, so Confucian scholars would be studying the language to learn as many characters as possible, take this really, really hard test just to prove that they could be of the elite scholars. So Song Soo Nam is bringing that tradition of the scholar artist back through his modern literati movement of the Sumukwa. They're very simple, they're very reductive, but they are powerful, they're striking. Look at how he paints the trees, the fact that we can still read them as trees, even if it's just swatches of value. He's also talking about that idea of nature being something of loyalty, intelligence, spirituality, strength, and the idea of a group of pine trees being like a group of friends with upright character, the power of many over the power of one. Some people talk about it in relation to Western art, East being Asia, West being Europe and America is another out-of-date term. Don't like it too much, but it's what we use. And his work was being compared to other abstract works earlier and around the same time, and he's like, nope, that's not where I am coming from, and Korea has its own rich history that he is reacting to instead, so there is that tension there. Faith Ringgold, who sadly just passed away this year, is an amazing black female artist who created the Dancing at the Louvre from the French Collection series. And this piece, she is highlighting folk art and the art of the people. She brings a black narrative and a black female narrative at the forefront. She is creating a story quilt in reference to story quilts in the past along the Underground Railroad, in code making, and as well as that comfort that a quilt brings. She talks about how you might not feel attached to a canvas on a wall by itself. It feels distant. But if you have a quilt, you understand it inherently, which I love that side of it. She's raising then that folk art that is not seen as fine art by contemporary museums and other artists. People are really weird about the stuff that people make at home and things that are also often traditionally seen as women's art. So she's highlighting that. And in this story quilt, she combines text, painting, quilt making to tell a story of a fictional, kind of a self-insert character of this woman and her family. The figures here dancing at the Louvre, so breaking down this tension between white and black and rewriting the past. I love this because the past is told through our narratives that we keep around, and the power to just say, no, I'm going to rewrite it is really strong. So she is taking the black narrative and changing it so that her character is meeting Picasso, dancing at the Louvre, hanging out with Josephine Baker, and breaking down the wall of that wasn't possible for black people and black women to do. She challenges that narrative. So it creates this really powerful story of storytelling in general. Super cool series. There's the name I forgot to include of the fictional character, Willa Marie Simone. And she gets to move to Paris and do all these amazing things, because why not? Push the power of positivity. Then we have Earth's Creation with Emily Kanagaware. And Kanagaware, with her style of using synthetic polymer paints on canvas, she is doing these large-scale canvases. She is an Aboriginal artist from Australia. And she is taking Aboriginal techniques and applying it to a much larger scale, and a scale that is seen and respected in the fine arts community. She doesn't start until she is much older as an artist, so you can see she's older in all of these images, and she uses lines, dots, shapes, and colors to depict life in Australia, for example. This one's Earth's Creation, and talking about the nature and plants that happen after this green period, after the rainfall. Aboriginal art has a rich history, often using dots and lines and geometric shapes as part of their culture. Sand paintings are also very common in Aboriginal art. Jackson Pollock is inspired by Aboriginal art during an unfortunate era of primitivism there. But Kanagaware is using her background as an elder in her culture, in her group within Utopia is the name of the region, to expand upon the sand art, traditional stuff, the painting of the bodies during ceremonies. She is the one that people go to, right? She is taking those skills and then she is pushing into a new sphere. She's actually the highest priced, like the most successful as far as price at an auction for a female artist in Australia. Crazy to do, especially for Aboriginal Indigenous people. It is a huge win. She does help start things like Utopia Women's Batik group, which is a wax resist dyeing. I like to think of it as Easter eggs that kind of resisting the dye. And does these other showcases. She highlights other Aboriginal artists and other women artists, and she's working to push the envelope. And people love it because it's so abstract and so powerful and so interesting looking. So she's very successful there. Then we have Stadia 2 by Moretu. And Stadia 2, I love this piece so much. Moretu is a really fun artist. She works on a very, very large scale, crazy large scale. She is playing with a sense of duality where we're in a stadium that is for entertainment and gathering and community and celebration, but it's also a place in which people fight and dress up, and it's violent sometimes and invokes potential protests and other violence and nationalism and revolution and sports and politics and riots and all of that all in one, to have this collective energy of a stadium. Absolutely insane. So she does this movement through lines and shapes to represent flags. It's part of a triptych, actually. Really big triptych. So showing again that kind of religious adoration for this modern entertainment. And stadiums themselves create a really weird zone of organized chaos, just like Colosseum, where it's very organized, but you have gladiatorial combat of people dying. It's the same today in sports. She's also playing with the concept of this utopian abstraction, the idea that abstraction itself is more universal. It's collective rather than individual. It allows you to promote this sense of a universal language, and it can lead to revolution within its own right. She's including kind of this floor plan aesthetic, this people, this energy, this abstraction, to tell a story that we can look at and say, yep, I understand it. So those are the paintings. Then we get into more that are about kind of feminism. And I'm going to go faster because I like to talk too much. But our ones that are dealing more with feminist themes are Untitled 228 by Cindy Sherman, who is taking photography and looking at art history. We're looking at Judith of Holofernes as a subject, just like how we saw Caravaggio, the Calling of St. Matthew guy. He did Judith that we looked at. We looked at Gentileschi, who's not in our 250. We looked at hers. And Cindy Sherman in Untitled 228 is telling a series of art history through photography and kind of making fun of it and kind of highlighting it at the same time. It's very garish. It's over the top. It's kind of uncomfortable, but also cool at the same time. You see this drapery similar to how the High Renaissance treated clothing, like Raphael's Madonna images. You see the reds, the blues, all tied to Mary. You have the decapitated head, but it's a Halloween mask. You have intense kind of 80s makeup on top of the treatment of the skin as if it was a Da Vinci piece with the shading of the chiaroscuro. It's a very interesting approach to photography. So she is dressing in theater and then taking the photo and designing that whole space. And Judith is a very kind of female led story. She's saving her people. It's a very triumphant moment. There's those two that we had looked at before. And she's highlighting that female role, female photographer, but also kind of looking at the past and making fun of how artificial it can become. So lots of different elements. This unreality is a good descriptor for it. It feels fake. It's a gory story, but it's bland. It's painterly, but it's a photo. It's serious, but it's silly. And she likes to evoke that kind of duality. Speaking of duality, we have Rebellious Silence from the Woman of Allah series with Shirin Nashat. And this one, Ink on Photograph, I love this piece. It is very much, here's Nishat, about duality. Duality is the best way to describe this. Not only is the contrast strong in the photo itself, but she's exploring themes of her religion versus non-religious upbringing, her Iranian heritage and her U.S. citizenship, rebellion versus silence, oppression versus empowerment, and the female voice within this post-Iranian world. And you see that tension just within the image itself. It's bisected from the gun. One side is lighter than the other. There's a gun, but the writing is calligraphic poetry from women. It's a very peaceful writing, and it's a beautiful writing system, but it's talking about martyrdom. So it's this rebellious silence. There's tension, you're rebelling, you're pushing against what is going on in the world, but she hasn't said a thing. Pretty powerful. Contextually speaking, the Islamic Revolution is a huge game changer in Middle East at this point. There was dictator that took power in the Second World War. The Shah, he was very westernized. He looked at Europe and wanted kind of the look of it, but he was super violent, leading to things like the Black Friday Massacre. And there was a push towards women's rights, but it grew more restrictive under him. So people were fighting against him, and one of those people was this revolutionary Ayatollah Khomeini. And the Ayatollah is now a terrorist group, and at this time he is someone that people look towards. It's this cult of personality again. But he becomes quickly an authoritarian dictator. He's very repressive. He weaponizes Islam to tell people to do things for him and his benefit. So that weaponization of religion is an unfortunate constant throughout all of time. He supports women's rights at first, but then he reaffirmed anti-woman laws, and it became harder to be a woman in Iran. And women in general see this cultural shift where women are now required to wear a veil in public, and there's this feeling of oppression versus empowerment, because the veil is supposed to protect a woman's body from being sexualized, and as a choice is very empowering. It's part of showing the devotion to your religion and taking that right as a woman. It's a very empowering thing, but when it's done to the point where it's protecting women from being seen at all, and then more anti-woman laws on top of that, it hides women away from society to the point where they become less than. So the Ayatollah does that. The Woman of Allah series also looks at how the Middle East is looked at in society, in which it is often seen as exotic or less than because of primitivism or this scary thing. So like La Grande Odalisque from Romanticism, that's supposed to be an Arabic woman, and how? That's a French woman. But it's this very exoticization of women. They hear of harems and they're like, yes, please. And they lose their minds after that. So Nishat is exploring all of that and the way that she grew up in two different worlds. She is in a non-religious family, but here is in a very religious town. She's hearing chants and getting emotional over how beautiful they are, but also anxious for not practicing Islam. She moves to the U.S. before the revolution, and now she's disconnected from Iran after the revolution, but she doesn't fit into the U.S., and she can't relate to either, and she doesn't know how to reconnect. She does eventually find family again after it. And all of that comes together with rebellious silence. Next is The Lying with the Wolf by Kiki Smith. Kiki Smith, really interesting artist. I don't personally like this piece, but that's kind of on purpose. It's supposed to be uncomfortable looking. I love her sculpture work. And Smith is exploring religion and mythology and womanhood and nature. Those are kind of a lot of her big concepts of this nature, human and animal aspect, where you see this very tight relationship between a woman and an animal. They do feel intimate with each other, but it is a human and a wolf, something that we should be scared of, and yet it is tame. She's playing on the female nude, which is usually seen through a male gaze. This one is uncomfortable. The gravity doesn't make sense. The composition is more towards the left. It doesn't feel right. And space is flattened, but there's still depth. So it feels uncomfortable, but it is a female nude. And it's posed almost like Manet's Olympia, kind of flipped, like tiny feet and everything. And it takes away that power of the male gaze when it's depicted in a way that's not over the top, idealized, pretty. It's just a woman lying with a wolf in a very uncomfortable space. So Smith is exploring mythos as well. So Little Red Riding Hood and Saint Genevieve are popular stories that involve women and wolves, with Saint Genevieve being a patron saint that helped France stop the Attila the Hun. She's associated with domesticated wolves, so you see that in her piece there. Little Red Riding Hood has so many different interpretations, but the wolf is usually a villain that consumes her. But as time has continued, that Little Red and wolf relationship has changed, and people like to explore that and play with it as a theme. So you can look at it as a predator and a prey, man versus woman, or you can look at it as humans and nature. It could look like something comfortable or something uncomfortable. It could be Christian or not Christian. And Kiki Smith loved when people took multiple meanings out of her work. That was something she really loved to do. Next is Praying Mantra with Mutu, 2006, mixed media on Mylar. Mylar is a fabric. Mutu, another fascinating artist. I love these global contemporary ones. Praying Mantra is a really intense piece. There's Mutu, in which she is looking at her African heritage and exploring themes of blackness and Africa and womanhood and a lot of the uncomfortable conversations that can stem for those. So when she is doing this piece, she is paying homage to culture, and she's reimagining it in a fantasy-like setting. But she's also, big thing with this piece, commenting on hybridity. Hybridity is a new culture that emerges from a colonizer and colonized relationship. Just like the Castas paintings in New Spain, when Spain takes over Aztec Mexico, you don't have Aztecs and Spanish anymore. You're going to have Mexicans. It's a hybrid culture. So she's exploring that kind of concept here with black colonization in Africa. She's also talking about how black women are often treated and overly sexualized, but also seen as dangerous. That aggressive black woman, so scary, and yet we like to ogle at her in culture. So she's commenting on that, and she's doing this by combining nature and myth and history to tell that new story. So she's doing it in lots of visual ways. This is a collage, so she's playing upon other collage artists like Hawk and Bearden, that Dadaism and the Harlem Renaissance, and she's tying that in and using documents from literature in the West to do it. The idea of mixing the West with an African fantastical story. The most interesting part to me about Praying Mantra is the title itself. The idea of the praying mantis. Praying mantises, and you can see that in how she's kind of displayed. The arms are kind of tucked like praying mantises. That you can the female praying mantis are sexual cannibals. So usually in art history, females are the ones that are ogled at. They're the ones that are vulnerable. They're the ones that are consumed in a way. And yet the praying mantis consumes the male. After mating, they eat the mate, starting with the head and then working their way in. So it's playing on that aggressiveness, but also taking back that power. She's in a vulnerable position, but she's not vulnerable. She's relaxed yet tense. She's being seen as a sexual object by laying down, and yet she has control. Her legs are crossed. There's also the commentary on praying mantra, talking about being preyed upon by mantra. Women are being sexualized and preyed upon. She is vulnerable here, and yet she's disturbing. I like to think of Hunchback of Notre Dame, Hellfire, is that in one moment he's desiring Esmeralda, and then the next he fears her. Right? So it's that dichotomy and that back and forth that makes zero sense. And no matter what version that they see the woman as, it is making the woman feel not even human. It's just something for men. So she's commenting on all of that, while also still including that African background. So hers is Kenyan and Nairobi, of the Kikuyu people. This patterning down here for the collage is a Kuba cloth. So these cloths are very important. She also has a headpiece. The trees represent females and fertility and growth. There's a serpent that is referencing potentially Eve or nature. She's connecting history and fiction, African and non-African, all in the same conversation. Next are sculptures. Loading that up. For sculptures, we have some really interesting pieces. They're all interesting, I can't help it. We have Androgen 3 by Abakanowicz, 1985. And Abakanowicz is a Polish artist in which she casts burlap in resin and then pushes them into molds to create these androgynous figures. They're supposed to be representative of kind of just humanity. It is not one single person or one single binary. It is all, it is everything. And the coolest part about her figures, and especially this one, is that they are hollow on the inside. And here we see kind of a stretcher-like object made out of woods and nails that continue the flow of the legs out with the burlap on the end. So Abakanowicz is looking at the brutality of war. She was kind of from this noble aristocratic family in Poland during World War II. Nazis come in and they actually shoot her mother's arm off right in front of her. And that's a very traumatic moment to kind of deal with and work through as a child, especially. She ends up becoming a nurse. She sees more kind of terrible things. So she's looking at how people suffer within war. The figure is hollow. It is hunched. It is on a stretcher. It has no legs. It has no limbs. It feels empty. It's a husk. She's also coming to terms with her identity as an aristocrat. She flees with her family, and they have to hide their background so that they're not ostracized first by the Germans and then by the Soviets. So she has to change who she is, and she loses her sense of self that way. Once you have none of your family background, you lose part of what makes you you. So she's having to come to terms with that. So again, that empty, hollow husk again. We also look at human nature, the humans versus nature. There's natural materials. There's no gender. She's exploring humanity as a whole instead of one single person. And then it's a reaction against communism. So she is Early on in her in becoming an artist, she's like forced into doing social realism, because that's what was acceptable at the time in Warsaw. And she breaks from this eventually. She dislikes the style. She dislikes being told what to do, especially as she's trying to explore these larger themes. So then she moves to these other types of media like burlap and string and resin. Pink Panther by Jeff Koons, such a interesting something of a piece. It is glazed porcelain, 1988, and when we're looking at Koons, we're looking at kitsch. Kitsch is this very like bad taste art that you're gonna see in antique shops and in your grandma's house. It is just kind of capitalism commodities that are low effort yet look like pretty high effort. It's just over the top. Here he is. He's a interesting man. Early on in his career as an artist, he's exploring these themes of kitsch and the overtop pop arty commodification of things and people, and he's exploring the concept of banality. So banality is being unoriginal. That's the whole point of banality. He does this exhibition, and it's supposed to be just copy paste from kitschy things in pop culture, and it's supposed to be offensive, and it's supposed to piss you off, because if it pisses you off, that means you're going to talk about it, and if you're talking about it, it makes him the money. And the weird thing here is he actually has other artists produce it. He doesn't. And they produce 3 of the same pieces so that he can show it in 3 locations at the same time. So talking about that mass market consumerism down to how he's approaching it. Very Warhol-esque, but kitsch. The subjects here are Pink Panther, a very popular cartoon, and Jane Mansfield, described as a B-list actress, who debuts around the same time, all of both her and the Pink Panther. So he's looking at the culture of the 60s when this kitschiness kind of really spurs and continues through the 80s. And critiquing mass media is a very popular thing to do by this point. Pop art and Dadaism both did it, so he's kind of continuing that line of thought. You probably have seen kitschy art around. I love kitsch. It's fun. Pink Panther's making fun of that. Also the fact that it's porcelain and it's large scale. Porcelain used to be like the fancy clay with like David vases. Everyone wanted porcelain and fine china. And now it's the kitsch, find it in the dollar store. Pisupo Lua'afe by Tuffery, 1984, is about kind of colonization and the effects of the mass market consumerism, again, on the Pacific Island community. So Tuffery is Maori. He's a teacher now, and he is looking at how New Zealand was impacted by other environments, other culture. We have Europe had pushed into the Samoan culture and into New Zealand and Australia and the Pacific Islander region, introduced cows. The cows are now kind of destroying New Zealand's landscape. They also introduced canned meat in canned goods, which work in the Pacific because of trade. Canned goods last longer, therefore they hold up and do better when traveling and trading. So like Hawaii does Spam. Here pisupo means like pea soup, but it gets turned into just like any canned goods. So the cow here is made out of pisupo cans, all kind of tied together, talking about how it is a favorite food source, beef is kind of a ceremonial gift, and it becomes the corn beef becomes a common gift. But problem is it has high fat, which leads to heart disease, diabetes, etc. And yet it's part of a staple of the diet. So he's commenting on the environmental and the human impact while also lifting up Maori culture in this look at food sovereignty and security. This cow is very industrialized, it's upcycled, so he's trying to remove the waste that is over the top waste for these canned goods. He's looking at cows, which have been destroying the landscape. He is talking about how food is scarce but also exploited, and how the Pacific Islanders are exploited. But he's also looking at performative art. The cow, some of the cows that he's done are on wheels, and they get pushed around, and they're loaded with fireworks, and they ram them into each other in this very ceremonial dance excitement kind of way to bring the local culture together. So a really cool piece there. Swing After Fragonard by Shonibare is looking at I don't have my slides done there, but looking at the original swing by Fragonard and playing with that contextual through a shift in the visual. So he's commenting on colonialism by including the Dutch wax fabric that the Dutch tried to pawn off to Indonesia but didn't take, and then pawned off to Africa, which did take. He's darkening the skin of the figure to talk about colonization in Africa. It's a French piece and Dutch fabric, but African woman, but is head cut off in reference to the revolution, and all part of commenting on that art history. So the men are taken away. I like to look at it personally as kind of talking about that sexualization part of the swing, but he's looking at kind of that colonized storytelling. So it's taking back a French story and making it African, like the African story got made French. So it's also talking about class and morality and French Revolution, and looking at it with this nationalistic perspective. Really interesting piece. Love it so much. Love all of his pieces. He looks at things like Scramble for Africa to point out how ridiculous it all is. Really, really cool. Then we have Old Man's Cloth by El Anatsui. El Anatsui is, there he is right there. He is combining alcohol cans and soda cans and whatever trash kind of washes up on shore, smashing them down and weaving them together, combining them to create these cloths. So he is an African artist, and he is talking about that trade between Africa and Europe, the triangle trade, including slavery, alcohol, sugar, or any of those goods that pass through that triangular network. He is taking alcohol, for example, and creating something that is movement and fabric and cloth and drapery, and something organic from something inorganic. And a cloth, especially when you call it Old Man's Cloth, feels something comfortable, yet it's an uncomfortable material. And he's looking at that drinks, the drinks, the alcohol being something that's important between Europe and Africa. It was one of those commodities. Ghana in particular, sorry, I couldn't remember off the top of my head. But it's talking about that consumerism, and it's taking away and commenting on at the same time that kind of power of Ghana at this time. So we have things like gold being used to reference gold being on that triangle trade. We're looking at textiles as a whole being something from Ghana and other parts of West Africa. So having it look like a cloth references that textile history there. And this idea of art versus craft. So just like Faith Ringgold saying a quilt is fine art, he's saying clothing and textiles is a fine art. So that blend there. Then I split it into video installations and installations themselves to kind of make a distinction. For video installations, you can't talk about a video installation without talking about Nam June Paik. So Electronic Superhighway, 1995, he is using TVs. So at this point with Global Contemporary, TVs now exist. They're common, so much so that you can use them for an artwork. He's also using neon. And Pike is kind of the father of video art. He starts playing with TVs and videos, recording himself, displaying them in museums, hanging TVs, planting TVs in gardens. He puts magnets on TVs to change the frequencies of the cathode rays, like all these kind of different stuff. So Electronic Superhighway is kind of both a positive and a critical look at video in America at the time. It is all 50 states. They are separated by neon signs, just like how you would see going down the interstate. So it's this connection between the states, and yet they are disconnected. And then the TVs are all like uniform across the states. Like there's TVs everywhere, but they each play different stations and different videos that relate to that state. For example, Kansas has Wizard of Oz. Iowa's got like the presidential elections because of the caucuses. And they're all playing at the same time. So it's way like a lot of noise pollution, very loud, overstimulating. So it is connecting the states together, but it's commenting on how TVs are, and this mass consumerism is overstimulating too much, and is leading us to be disconnected. So it's connection and disconnection, especially nowadays as we are more used to being overwhelmed by technology. So Pike will always use those videos in his work. Very cool artist. Then we have The Crossing by Bill Viola. This one really fascinating. We see Bill Viola do man versus nature, as we see in other artworks, but he talks about it as a sense of time. So when you look at The Crossing, it is like, it's uncomfortable almost. It would have been projected. One side would have been water, one side would have been fire, so back to back. And nature is the subject, and it is slow. He's showing off slow motion video, kind of this new thing that's happening, and it's forcing the viewer to sit and wait and be uncomfortable as it slowly works its way into being all consumed by nature. Usually when I show this in class, people can't make it the full 2 minutes of just this video. It's uncomfortable, and he does this on purpose. He's showing off slow motion, but he's also forcing the viewer to concentrate and be aware of every detail, every movement, every breath, every change. They're looking for those differences in waiting. I like to compare it to Ryoanji, kind of making this monotonous thing turn into something that is meditative. And it forces you to slow down. In a world so fast, you should take it slow. And he actually does travel to Japan and is kind of inspired by those kind of ideas. Then we have Mariko Mori's Pure Land. I love this piece so much. So Mori is a Japanese artist. This is originally a video installation, and then this one is a color photograph on glass. And Mori is looking at Buddhism and Japanese culture in a contemporary way. So the way we see her, she is looking like bodhisattvas, which the aliens are actually bodhisattvas. She's looking like a celestial being. She has the celestial robe. She's on the lotus blossom, connected to enlightenment. Her eyes are these bright white look. it is in this Dead Sea kind of area. So the pink water is related to the Dead Sea. Dead Sea has a lot of salt. Salt is purification. So tying it into the religious meaning as well. We have it showing stupa. We have the distant horizon line. There is a presence and an omnipresence at the same time. This would have been playing music and pumping fragrances. She would be whispering. It's very tranquil, almost ASMR, but as a whole scene. And it's super symbolic, very Shinto meets Buddhism, hence the salt, the purification, but also the lotus blossom, purity and enlightenment. We have her specifically, we're looking at Amida Buddhism, which is that Pure Land Buddhism, hence the name Pure Land. And the audience becomes involved in this. And Mori liked to look at oneness and universality and getting people to think and be moved by her art. She often used these little alien guys. In this case, they are bodhisattvas. And she's getting people to feel that collective, but she is also putting herself in this piece. She is the one with mudra blessing and teaching people. She's putting herself in the traditional spot of the Buddha, of the Amida Buddha. And she's embodying a goddess at the same time. So she is in charge of enlightenment and paradise. So she's telling you that meditation is good. It is a really interesting thing to put yourself into that narrative in that way, and it's not meant to be like egotistical. It's just kind of bringing Buddhism to the forefront of modern times. So there's some more images. She would have come flying in. Then we have Darky Town Rebellion, not really a video installation, but it does use a projector, so I wanted to highlight that, with Kara Walker. Kara Walker, super cool artist. I love Walker. She uses cutout silhouettes, and she is talking about race and portrayals of Black people throughout time, and she's doing it in a very overt way. She shows off a lot of violent imagery and racial stereotypes and caricatures of Black people that are not okay, and she's doing it with such purpose that it's supposed to make you feel uncomfortable. Like, you're supposed to look at it and go, oh my God, as a country, we did this. This is history. This is fact. But because she's doing it in silhouettes, it's almost more palatable because you're not seeing the faces of the people. You're seeing the ideas of the people. You see the idea of a lynching, of rape, of forced abortions, of rebellion, of stripping away people from their power, of violence, of all of these horrible things that did happen, and the violence that did happen to Black people. And in this one in particular, in Darky Town Rebellion, we're looking at how she adds color in there as well, using that projector to display the kind of intense feelings of that rebellion, all with the color expanding and feeling it a lot more. And these rebellions were often not talked about. They're erased from the narrative. So she's bringing that back. So, for example, here we have the Daily Constitution. We have an article about a mob lynching of a Black woman. Super brutal. Tree flung onto the woman's body into air. Like, it was a horrible lynching, but we don't have the why she was murdered, who she was, any of the information about her except for that it happened. So she's bringing attention back to those violent stories that were passed over. So very, very powerful piece. Moving on to installations. Installations are anything where you are installing it into a location. And one of the installations, I love this one, Book from the Sky from Zhu Bing. This is a mixed media installation in which we see this emphasis on text, and he's using woodblock printing to create this almost landscape-like environment that focuses on language and propaganda, except it's not language as we see it, because we have these pages and pages and pages of Chinese text, but most of it is complete gibberish. 1,000 of them are totally made up. It's like wingdings on Word back in the day. But by putting it in this mass quantity, in this almost religious-like experience with the paper like hanging and draping through the room and creating this horror vacui and precision and all of that, it creates a feeling that this is important. The words have to be important because there's so many of them. And yet, when you see so much of it, it means nothing. Are you really reading it, or are you looking at it as a whole? So he's talking about how they do that in propaganda in communism. He's commenting especially on Chinese communism with Mao Zedong, like our Mao en route to Anyang, where woodblock printing gets used to spread leaflets, propaganda, brochure, whatever, to as many people as possible. And you are so used to seeing the symbols and the characters that the mass quantity of them start meaning nothing. It doesn't mean anything when it's that much. And yet being so overwhelmed by it makes it feel important. So you see how he's showing this and dealing with this, again, this East versus West idea and commenting on communism as a whole. And he did these big, large sculptures relating to Chinese history. So a lot of interesting approaches. So you can see how much it means nothing. Then we have Trade, Gifts for Trading Land with White People by Jane Quick to See Smith. So Quick to See Smith is looking at indigenous population in Americas and how Native Americans were commodified and their humanity stripped away to become mascots and cheap products and advertisements. So you have the canvas here being a canoe, something tied to Native American river cultures that help trade and transport and communicate, and yet here it's abandoned. It's not on water. It's still, it's stuck. You can't move, and this red dripping like the blood of the people who were slaughtered and pushed out of their homeland, and above all the truth and the stories and the collaging, there's the commodities, the mascots, the redskins, the chiefs, the hats, all the stuff that people still take of Native Americans and those stereotypes and putting them on display here. So giving up so much just to be a trinket. And it is, once again, a triptych. See the 3 panels? So she's also talking about kind of that religious tie to it, because religion that forced Christianity also happened to the Native American people. Red is also synonymous with Native heritage and warfare and anger, so she's using red in a very smart way and talking about identity and the Native American story. We then have No Crying Allowed in the Barbershop by Osorio. And No Crying Allowed in the Barbershop is like a full, pretty much functioning barbershop that he decorates. There he is, Puerto Rican artist. He's talking about the concept of machismo. Barbershops are where men especially have this very masculine experience of getting their hair cut, talking to each other, talking about their interests, etc. And it's seen as this very masculine experience. And yet this barbershop also has this contrasting very light pink walls and doilies and greenery and portraits of like buff men. So it's commenting on what is masculinity versus femininity. We also have the seats being like car seats. Puerto Rican flag is there. There's references to circumcisions, and there's male action figures and phallic symbols. There's a rose on the wall, which is a common like tattoo design, right? But also it's a flower. It's very feminine. And that machismo culture, they're not supposed to cry. There's also pictures of crying men. So it's commenting on both that masculine togetherness and yet that stripping away of masculinity, commenting on, is this the way that we want to go? No crying aloud in the barber shop. You're not allowed to show emotion. So there's those roses, there's the bullets, they look like phallic symbols. So this combination of feminine and masculine, and talking about that in Hispanic community. Then we have Shibboleth by Salcedo. I love Shibboleth. I'm going to keep saying I love them to all of them. But Shibboleth is about immigration. So here's Salcedo. She's talking about the crack that splits immigrants and non-immigrants, this segregation and hatred in which people become divided. So it's a crack actually in the floor of the museum, and it divides people. They're trying to escape wherever they're coming from for more opportunities, or they need to, or family, or whatever, and yet once they get there, they're met with like so much obstacles, right? So you're an immigrant, so you're othered, you're discriminated against. It's not fair. And she comes from Colombia, so she's talking about the kind of U.S. Immigration into from other countries into the U.S. So that crack continues to get bigger and bigger. So the more you don't address it, the bigger the crack gets. And the more your family is second generation, third generation, etc., the more disconnected from the original culture you are. It just widens and widens. So really interesting. There you can see some of the crack and it divides off. Really interesting thing is that when they put it, like when they finish this installation, they seal up the crack, but the scar of it is still there. You can't quite get rid of it, so you can still see the crack in this location. Very conceptual, and allows you to kind of interpret it in your own way. So then, very last one here, we're going to earthworks and architecture. Loading. I did kind of combine some stuff here. So I do have Spiral Jetty from Content Area 4 by Robert Smithson, but it's like, it's so close and it feels so right to put it with contemporary. Kusama, I could probably do that too as well. So Spiral Jetty in Salt Lake City, Utah, is talking about nature. He is a land artist, and he is looking at the environment, at water, and the idea of chaos and order, this concept of entropy, and how things go from order to disorder. And you can see that in how he's approaching it. He's using all natural materials, dirt, shells, rocks, etc., to build this land bar that goes and stretches out into the ocean and starts to spiral, matching kind of the wave current and the feeling of the water, but also how over time this starts to fade away. He's organizing it, and yet time will take care of Spiral Jetty and it'll disappear because natural world goes from order to disorder. And you're supposed to be able to interact with it in different seasons. It's nature. So there's high tide, there's low tide, there's winter, there's summer, and it's all gonna change. And the water will change, the colors will change. So the artwork will always live and be something different depending on when you see it. It's also a very salty area, so you get that pinkish color occasionally. And talking about ongoing drought and how sand starts to fill the spaces between the spirals instead of water. So the water disappears and now there's sand. So a lot of interesting environmental messages. I like Entropy is a good talk of that one. Next, The Gates by Christo and Jean-Claude, or Jean-Claude. Jean and Christo are looking at New York City, Central Park in particular. So you can see, woo, big old Central Park there. And Central Park was not doing too well at this point. People weren't really going to it. And yet it's added as this escape from this intense city living where you can get caught up in that corporate jungle of New York City. Central Park is supposed to be a relief from that, a pastoral Victorian ideal, this picturesque landscape, and something for people to take a break from their world. But it wasn't really being used for that. It was it was a mess. Central Park was a mess. So the artists go and they create these gates that are meant to look like torii gates that come from Japan, that kind of connect nature and humans together and highlight the nature. So you're seeing this temporary project where they're adding all these fabric and wood gates and bringing people to Central Park, get them interested in Central Park, fall in love with Central Park, and then want to go to it. And this was a huge move. People now use Central Park constantly, walk their dogs, play, relax, etc., the way it was originally intended. So the gates really helps do that for the area. Beautiful also to see that orange against the greenery. So they're using orange in reference to the Shinto gates, as well as making it stand out and contrast against the greenery. And Shintoism is all about kind of that natural connection, man and nature. Then we look at some architectural pieces. I consider this architecture Vietnam War Memorial by Maya Lin. She's using granite, and it's a very polished granite, so it's very reflective, as you can see there. It is dedicated to those who lost their lives during the Vietnam War. I've actually gotten to go to this one, and the ground itself is level, and you go down. And as you go down, all the names of the people who lost their lives, the soldiers, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and then you are consumed by this sculpture, this architectural piece. And the granite reflecting back, you see the names, but you see yourself. It's a very introspective and yet like daunting thing to see how many people lost their lives, and yet we're here today. But it's not the wall itself. She didn't want to make this really pretty ornate wall like a lot of the memorials are, because it wasn't about her. She got a lot of flack for her artwork. It was not well received. It was too abstract. But later people liked it. Kind of like I don't even know what to compare it to. Like the Eiffel Tower. People hated it, and now they love it. She also is connecting to Greek mythology a little bit with Orpheus. If you listen to Hadestown, that one's going to make sense to you. The earth isn't harmed that much because she didn't want to take away from nature. She angles it so that it aligns with the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial, because she is in the Washington, D.C. Mall. She has to fit within this zone, so it takes you from Washington and ends you at Lincoln, which is also a really interesting, very smart decision that she makes. Hard to do, very impressive. Look at how large it is and how many names of those people there were. And people do actually take paper and they like scribble on it so that they have the name of the people they're related to still. And it's by year. People leave flowers. Very, very emotional project. So she did a great job. And there she is. So super young. Awesome work. All right, 2 more pieces. Guggenheim in Spain by Frank Gehry. Gehry is a major architect. I remember very few architects. I remember Frank Lloyd Wright and Frank Gehry. So the Franks are the ones I remember. Guggenheim's a really fun museum. It is very wiggly. It is the San Carlo of the modern day. So Guggenheim, this one is in Bilbao, which is in Spain, and he does this project. He's commissioned to help kind of grow the economy in Bilbao, and it is a branch of the Guggenheim Museum in New York. So they're expanding, bringing it to Spain, and he's creating these very undulating curves that we haven't seen since the Baroque in kind of European architecture. Bauhaus made everything very geometric, flat, and practical. So he's playing around with a much funner design. I said funner, not a word. Sorry. And he is also, he's kind of having fun with this design. It's very highly regarded. It is part of this renewal program by the regional government because they are not doing well economically. So they're trying to bring tourists to help bring in money. Gehry himself was known for doing these, they were known as deconstructivism, these deconstructed work where you take the main figures and you deconstruct, you move, you pull. It's almost like cubism for architecture. And he looks at it as almost drapery. Shapes are a language to play with and not like architectural things that you have to commit to. So he likes to make it feel organic. So he's really innovating upon what architecture can be and saying, let's not make it a boring building. Let's have fun, even if we're using things like titanium to make it shimmer in the light, just like golden domes of the past. We're going to be dramatic. We're going to have light come through naturally so that we can see the artwork in their natural sense. We're going to have a museum that takes you through in a way that leads you through the museum in a natural way. There's 20 separate galleries. There's no pediments. There's no colonnades. We're not relying on Greek and Roman architecture to tell a story anymore. We're doing something new. We're having fun. We're breaking tradition so that we can actually continue to change, since most of the architecture even we've looked at has been very Greek Rome forever. Because look at that. It's almost like a flower. It's organic. It's natural. It's almost living. And it doesn't fit those typical floor plans that we have looked at in the past. It's now, it's modern, it's movement, it's action, it's flowers, it's nature, it's everything. Really, really fun architecture. Similarly and yet different, we have the Maxi National Museum. This one's in Italy, and the architect is Zaha Hadid. Newer museum, 2009, glass, steel, and cement. Another kind of wiggly building. We have that contrast of the geometric on the outside and the organic on the inside. So he's looking at a few different areas. He's looking at modernism, so the Bauhaus. He's looking at constructivism, so before deconstructivism. Again, very shapy language. He's looking at Russian painters, so that constructivist idea, the propaganda pieces we had with the great... the 5-year plan Great Leap Forward one. He's looking at geometry as clean, as something that is for something that people can walk up to and understand, almost like a ribbon, to flow through the museum. It is actually resting on some older buildings and encompasses those older buildings with some new designs. The walls are separated and they intersect. He's devoting it, it's almost like a summary of all the 21st century art. If you look at Villa Savoy, if you look at the Carson Building, Falling Water, he's paying homage to all of that. And he's using concrete like the Romans made. So he's honoring the Romans in the tradition in that way. The inside is, I like to see it as San Carlo too, that kind of wiggly style there. It has two separate museums, actually. The glass allows for a lot of light again, so it has a very airy sense, even though it's a stocky build. And we are creating this ideal neo-futurism of progressive art and ideology, and it's supposed to show these bigger, more modern art pieces, so we have to have the light and the building help support the art that goes inside it. Which is a really cool way of looking at architecture. That function is really pushed. And I'm sorry if I said he. It's a she. I'm a failure. My feminism has been revoked, which is a terrible way to end this video. But really, really fun buildings. That's Global Contemporary. It goes through a lot of different changes, but it's all about the social movement. So always remember the why when you're looking at Global Contemporary. Thanks for watching. Good luck on your test.